Hey there, Canada. I'm David Fitzgerald, and I took a left at the Valley.
I know we shouldn't have to scream that we're atheists. You know, we don't have non-astrologers and all that. But with the religious people taking over the world, I mean, we can either speak up or be pushed into a corner.
I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it. I say it's ignorance and you just call it faith and unsubstantiated claims. That's something to be ashamed. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist.
Coming at you from the acid trip of revelation, this is Left of the Valley. My name is Kevin, and I am that seven-headed dragon your mom warned you about. Joining me as usual is the apocalyptic team that rides into the sunset of skepticism. On her white horse conquering history is Nancy.
Oh, on a white horse in all this snow, you'll never see me.
On his red horse, he declares war on superstition, Tyler.
What the hell is that noise?
I don't know.
Okay.
On her black horse, she's just sick of not being able to ride a real horse, Deb.
Hey, that black is kind of slimming, don't you think? I'll have another cookie.
Guys, welcome back. I hope you guys had a great week.
It was a snowy, cold one, but it was a week for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Something interesting going on in the weather around here. We at least got a winter now.
It is a winter wonderland.
Woohoo! Guys, we got a great show today. We'll be talking later on with our good friend David Fitzgerald about St. Paul, and that should be an interesting interview. I can't wait to hear Tyler and David go at it. This should be really cool.
He's a great guest, and I know Tyler can be in there with him toe to toe. So
That's gonna be
it'll
cool.
be great.
I retroactively predict it goes well.
A couple of little chit chat before we go in there. Guys, did you hear that PI, Prince Edward Island, passed the basic income legislature?
Yeah, I did. The question is it going to spread all through Canada?
Well, apparently now they're the second province to do it. Ontario was the first. They're going to develop a pilot project. The motion was carried by the Green Party leader, which his name is Peter Bevan Baker. And Ontario right now is proposing, they're probably going to try to copy Ontario. Ontario's going to propose to give $1,320 a month as an income guarantee to everybody that's in Ontario, and that should be replacing welfare and disability programs.
Which is great. I mean, it ought to be enough so that no one is evicted from their home or suffers from starvation because they can't afford food that doesn't come from the dollar store.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that I've been on disability before. Obviously, I'm blind. I did it with a child as well. But even with a child, I was getting $1,200, which is less. I have a roommate who's on welfare, and she gets a total of $600 for everything.
You just can't make it with that. Right?
No way. So, and I mean, I think disability when you don't have a kid is like maybe $900 a month. So this is a drastic increase.
Yeah, and especially in this region, the prices of renting is really, really high, and it's actually hard to find a place to rent. I read, like in Abbotsford, where we are right now, it's actually one of the hardest places to rent in the province, in BC.
Well, the good thing about it is that you can't age out of a basic income.
That's right.
And you can't get into a dispute as to whether or not you're on, you deserve disability. I think there's some really weird things that people have to go through. Even if they lose a limb, they're up for review, and they still have to prove that they haven't grown another one.
You're in a wheelchair all your life. You have to prove that you can't walk.
And
really?
It's degrading.
It is.
It takes away, the fact that we're all humans and we're all equal. You have to prove that you're something in order to get the money.
Well, it was easy for me, but being blind, obviously pretty simple. But like you said, you can see a lot of disabilities, but there's a lot of mental disabilities that you can't see. So
it's not easy to
now
see.
there is a lot of financial aspect to this program that I have investigated to an exhausted amount for how much it's going to cost and this and that. And people argue about it all the time. But what are we paying for, the social workers who are doing all this interviewing and paperwork and the buildings and their utilities.
Exactly.
So if you'll get rid of all that and you literally have the push of a button and it's automatic, not even the push of a button, because it's directly deposited into people's accounts, or they get a check mailed to them or something.
Welfare Wednesdays might become a thing of the past.
I'm actually feeling something really wonderful coming on as far as the screenplay goes, Tyler. I mean, the people that you just described, those social workers, the ones that are, ultimately making the decision whether or not someone fits into the right category, the right box, and now their job is going away, and they may actually find themselves trying to get by on that minimum income each month.
Well, and
right?
people keep saying it's going to cost
change
more.
of play that is.
Yeah, people keep saying, it's going to cost more. Okay, but you're saving money on not having to pay for all this other crap.
Whose phone is ringing now?
I know, it's driving me insane. That's what I was talking about earlier in the show. But it also saves money on things like crime, and homeless people are so expensive that giving them houses is actually cheaper than having them be homeless.
That's right.
Because of the crime costs and police. So you're saving money all over the place.
Or the ripple effect of, they're now unhealthy and have to seek out
and they cost
medical care.
And they cost health care. So, but I want to see more details about this plan. I'm aware of all the experiments that have been done. And usually what they do is they give you, $1,300, $1,320, whatever you said, a month. And then you're allowed to make a certain amount. Like me being on disability, I'm with a family. I'm allowed to make $1,000 a month, and then they take dollar for dollar after that. Mm-hmm. So they might have something similar to that. So once you start going up in tax brackets, you get less. Because realistically, you can't give everybody over the age of 18 $1,300 a month. You just can't afford it. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. But does somebody who's making $100,000 a year really need an extra $1,300 a month?
Absolutely
no.
not.
So it's going to gradually become less and less and less. It's kind of like the negative income tax that Milton Friedman, who I hate, proposed, but he was right about it, that we can't afford it if we give it to everybody. So it has to slowly decrease. That way you're not punishing people by saying, if you get a job, we're going to just deduct it all off your check. But then you're not giving them any incentive to actually work.
Yeah, and by cutting these welfare programs and the disability programs, you essentially are going to be funding a great chunk of it. And you know what? Even if they do raise our taxes to have this program running, I've got no problem with that.
Well,
I've got no problem with that.
As long as they're not raising it on low income and lower middle class, as long as they're raising it on the top people.
It's a safety net.
Like
you're
tax.
not going to fall below.
Yeah.
And it's also going to help in decriminalizing being poor. At this point, people who are homeless, it costs more for people to be on the street than it does to help them. This is going to reduce the cost of policing,
and ambulance service and hospital,
and all of the services, and the people who are benefiting from the poverty industry, or the misery industry, as some call it.
Well,
it's really going to change people's lives in a very positive
I hope it spreads
way.
to the rest of the country.
Well, it's also better than minimum wage, because if you own a small business and you're paying your employees $10.50 an hour, and then law passes that you have to pay them an extra $3 or $4 an hour, you're just going to have to charge more for your services or your products or whatever. So it's going to go up, and then it just goes up and up and up, and that's just stupid. Mm-hmm. So this basic income guarantee, if we can do it without driving up the price of the cost of living, because that's the objection that I hear from these people is if you give out a basic income, the cost of living is going to go up. But it's not, because you're not driving up the price of products and services.
If these people actually have a bit of spare money, they will put it back into the economy as well.
Well, this is why if you just Google the libertarian case for the basic income, they support it as well. And then you just kind of take the left-wing model and the right-wing model, and they'll eventually kind of meet in the middle, and that's where you'll get your plan.
Mm-hmm. Well, the two provinces being sort of pilot programs will work out some of the bugs, and a lot of these things that the naysayers are coming up with will prove to be myths, and we'll have a better society.
It already has. They did it in Manitoba back in the 70s. And
that was Medicine Hat, wasn't it?
No, that's in Alberta.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Manitoba it's called the Maidenform project. It was back in the 70s in northern Ontario, and they dispelled a whole bunch of myths. People didn't quit working, so.
At the same time, too, it's interesting because PEI being the smallest province in the country will see the small scale effect, and Ontario being the largest population will see the full size scale as well. So we'll have actually both.
What's the population of PEI?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a tiny island. It can't be a whole lot.
Wow, Saskatchewan's like 1 million people. So
Yeah, well, it's probably less than half. Anyway, speaking of money, did you guys hear that our $10 bill is about to change?
It is indeed.
Yes, they're actually going to put Viola Desmond to be on the $10 bill. Woo-hoo! Now, she's going to be the first Canadian woman to actually appear on our currency. She's been called the Canadian Rosa Parks. She was from Nova Scotia, and her story was very similar to Rosa Parks. She went to a movie theater, and this was in 1946, and she refused to give up her seat because she sat down in the prime section, and she wasn't supposed to be, and she said, well, fine, I'll pay the extra charge, and she ended up being arrested and all that.
Educate me, was she a minority of some
Yes,
sort
yes,
other than being
she was
female?
black. She was black.
She's black, okay.
Yeah. And she died, unfortunately, in 1965, but the province of Nova Scotia pardoned her in 2010 for that transgression.
While she was still alive?
No, she died in 65, so
okay.
she was pardoned after in 2010.
Posthumously, eh?
Yeah, posthumously. And she was one of several women that were nominated to be on that, and she kind of won that lotto, I guess. And now we should be seeing this, I believe it might be 2017, 2018. So we'll have a new, she's going to replace the Johnny McDonald that's been on the $10 bill forever now.
Inconceivable!
And
That's great.
He looks like crap anyway. So
That's great. That acknowledges.
Yes.
It's a beginning to acknowledge the diversity that's already
I
that's already
predict
here.
that if it's going to take that long to actually make that change, that your $10 will actually be worth maybe $10 at that point.
Might be worth $10 American?
American, yeah. Because you know what we're going to be going through at that point in time. Oh, boy.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and there's no women on American money, right?
There has been on coins.
Yeah,
but
like
not-
there was a Pocahontas coins at some point. Sacagawea, whatever.
Sacagawea. And there
Susan
was
B. Anthony
And Susan B.
dollar,
Anthony, right.
the
Okay.
coin, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
okay. My bad. Sorry,
It's
I
all
apologize.
right. We're a little bit quicker on that kind of thing with the women, anyway.
Well, we've had the Queen for how long?
Yeah, but she's not a Canadian woman, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, so that's the thing.
Be careful there, Kevin. You know, she's offered to take the states back. She might just come your way as well.
She sent us a letter.
Okay.
She sent us a letter. Yeah, you guys are not doing this right. We're taking back the United States. Oh, yeah, no. I guess of a sadder note, I guess astronaut John Glenn died at the age of 95. He was the first American to orbit Earth. Not the first one in space, but the first one to orbit. He went back to space at the age of 77. Also giving him the record for the oldest man in the space.
I know.
And he was a senator, and he also ran for president. I guess he will be sorely missed.
He will be. He's
had quite a life.
He was in an era of discovery.
Yeah, he was a pilot.
He'll go down as one of the giants.
He went 2 wars. I believe he went to World War II and Korea War. He fought as a pilot. An interesting character.
He never went to space. It was all filmed on one of those green backdrops.
That's right. It was all on the.
According to people on Facebook. So
Capricorn 1.
Capricorn 1. All right, my dear Nancy, you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Let's set you up.
Here we go. And this day in history, which is a roundup of those events and people that altered and illuminated the days between December the 5th and December the 11th. Starting with December the 5th, it was World Soil Day. So from the soil comes all of our produce, and it's a good thing to remember all the gardeners out there.
Nancy's got the dirt on that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, also on December the 5th, what do you think that women who served in the U.S. Armed Forces in World War II and carrier pigeons have in common?
delivering mail?
That's an interesting question, and I'm going to answer that question. But I'm not going to do it really quick. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit because this is a story that is so charming that
Suspense is killing me.
Yeah, I know the suspense is going to kill you, but you'll love it when I.
They both played ping pong.
Yeah. You ruined the whole story. Okay, here we go anyway. Back in the 20s, a lovely young Jewish girl named Ida Rosenthal founded a brassiere company that she named Maidenform. Now, back in the 20s, if you remember, most women were flappers, and Ida didn't invent the bra, but women were wearing bras. But unfortunately, because the flapper look was flat-chested, they were wearing bras that, kind of
squish everything.
Yeah, squished them all in.
Compressing.
Yeah, and Ida
What a
thought
crime against humanity.
Ida thought women should look more natural, and so she redesigned the bra so that when women wore elegant clothes, they really looked good. They showed off their endowments. And she was the one that came up with brassieres that had cups. And that was a huge deal in the time. Women, were looking better, and her business really thrived. And it went up to the 40s, and it just kept building and building, and it was a great business. She was located in New York.
See, this is why people listen to this show, so they can find out about boobs.
That's right. So I know
Everybody's got them.
Everybody. I mean, this is low tech, but it was tech.
All right.
So World War II came along, and materials to make bras became very scarce because a lot of the armed forces were taking over some of the factories in order to produce things for the armed services. Yeah. Right. So because her bra materials sort of fit in naturally, some of the materials that she used, she began to use some of the materials to make parachutes. So part of her factories were turned over to making parachutes, which was very interesting.
Really big-chested women.
Really, exactly. Right. Okay, so we're going to leave the parachutes and Ida and the Maidenform bra for just a minute, and we're going to start talking about carrier pigeons. Carrier pigeons were used in World War II to send messages and to send film and to send blood samples from hospitals. And the way the carrier pigeons worked were the parachuters would take the carrier pigeons and put them inside of their vests, and when they would land behind enemy lines or wherever they were going, they would release the carrier pigeons with whatever notes that they had about where they were or how the battles were going. But by stuffing these poor little pigeons in their clothes, a lot of the pigeons weren't making it on landing because they were either getting smothered or they were getting hurt. Yeah, so the armed forces and the parachuters now had to come up with a way, because carrier pigeons were really an important form of communication, believe it or not, during World War II, and they would make it. They could fly pretty fast and they could make it back. But they had to find a way to have the carrier pigeons be carried securely and safely so they could be released and make it back. So the armed forces began to think, Ida and Maidenform are already doing parachutes. Maybe that material would also be good for carrying the pigeons. And the armed forces and Ida Rosenthal got together and they designed the pigeon bra. They called it the pigeon breast, but believe me, it was a little pigeon bra.
For little peepers?
For little it was. And the vest was made out of very porous material. It had a very tight woven fabric underneath so the pigeon's claws wouldn't damage the mesh, and the vest was shaped to the body of the pigeon, leaving their little heads and neck and wingtips and so forth exposed. And then the vest was attached to the outside of the paratrooper's jacket, and he could actually put his hand over, the eyes or so forth, and hold the pigeon in. Well, once the paratroopers hit the ground, they'd release the pigeons, and it was such a success. They tested it out, and the way that the vests were made, the little bras were made, that in 1944, Maidenform agreed to make 28,500 pigeon vests for the U.S. government, and they all had a little warning stamped inside of it. It said, this is so wonderful, important, do not retain pigeon in vest in excess of 6 hours. So in the plains, getting the pigeons ready, they would take them out of the cages, put them in their little vests, and then when they, had the rip cords off, they would go. And so the pigeons were so valuable that actually during World War II, some of the pigeons got medals for heroic service in the way that they were able to fly.
The unsung heroes of World War II, the pigeons.
The unsung heroes, Maidenform and Pigeons were the unsung heroes of. And so Maidenform went on and did this wonderful campaign of I dreamt I went swimming, or I dreamt I went to the ball in my Maidenform. But they never had any advertising.
What a wonderful story.
Pigeon. Isn't it a wonderful story?
You're talking about boobs and cruelty to animals. So, Kevin, you need to throw a Pamela Anderson clip in here.
Oh, what a way to go. It works for me.
What was just said that Left of the Valley was not endorsed by PETA.
Anyway, there were approximately 56,600 carrier pigeons that were actually trained for war missions. And then, of course, you got other forms of communications. But now, just go ahead, try to think of a pigeon without a bra. You're not gonna next time
Challenge of the day.
Next time you see a pigeon, you're going to picture him in that little. And you can actually go online and look up pigeons and bras, and you can see exactly how those little vests were tied. They had little ties in the front. They were cute.
Laced and everything.
Laced up, they actually were.
Fashion for the birds.
That's right. Anyway, moving on to December the 6th. I hate to leave that story because I just was so enchanted by the whole thing. But here we go. Progress. We move on. December the 6th was the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, also known informally as White Ribbon Day, and that's a day that's commemorated in Canada each December the 6th, and it's the anniversary of the 1989 Polytechnic School massacre, which Mark Lepine murdered 14 women and injured 10 others in the name of fighting feminism.
In Quebec, right?
In Quebec.
Montreal.
Yeah. And the commemoration date was established by Parliament in 1991. December the 7th was National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. This was a full week. You ask what happened during the week.
It was a full week.
It was a full historic and hysteric week, I guess. So December the 7th, National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day in the U.S. December the 8th, it was Constitution Day in Uzbekistan. And in 2013, the humanist community at Harvard was delighted to announce that the governor issued an official proclamation declaring Sunday, December the 8th as Humanist Community Day. So throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it's Humanist Community Day, and that's a conjunction of a lot of things that go on at Harvard, and there are some other schools that have adopted the Humanist Community Day as well. December the 10th is Human Rights Day and International Animal Rights Day. And Nobel Prizes are also given out on that day. And 1901, the first Nobel Prize in Physics was given to William Röntgen for his discovery of X-rays. And in 1903, Nobel Prize Physics were given to Pierre and Marie Curie. 1935, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry to Marie Curie's daughter and her husband, Frederick Joliot, for the discovery of artificial radioactivity. December the 11th, I love this day, National Tango Day in Buenos Aires. Oh, man, we should put on a little tango music today to celebrate. And that, dear listeners, brings to a close another passing parade of interesting, mundane, unusual, and occasionally bizarre, though charming events and people that
pigeons.
Make up this day in history.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for this yet another entertaining this day in history. Now, this is usually the point where we say we'll be right back after these messages, but I'm not going to do this today because as soon as we come back from commercial, I want to go directly to David Fitzgerald. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do... Oh,
Ooh.
You're going to screw it up?
Yeah, that's right. All right. I've got an interesting story, and I want to hear what you guys think about this. Now, did you guys know this just came out actually? This came out December 8th. The tail of a 99 million year old dinosaur, including bones, soft tissue, and even feathers, has been found preserved in amber, according to a report published today in a journal called Current. And this is from the National Geographic,
which is a terrible source after 2015.
I agree, but I don't see the.
I'll double check it.
I don't see the story as being fake.
I didn't have the time to double check it before I came today.
So while individual dinosaur era feathers have been found in amber and evidence of a feathered dinosaur is captured in fossil impression, this is the first time that scientists are able to clearly associate well-preserved feathers with a dinosaur, and in turn gain a better understanding of the evolution and structure of dinosaur feathers. The research, which was led by paleontologist Lida Xing of the China University of Geosciences, was funded in part by the National Geographic Society Expedition Council. The semi-translucent mid-Cretaceous amber sample, roughly the size and shape of a dried apricot, captures one of the earliest moments of differentiation between the feathers of birds of flight and the feathers of dinosaurs. Inside the lump of resin is a 1.4-inch appendage covered in delicate feathers described as chestnut brown with a pale or white underside. The CT scans and microscopic analysis of the sample reveal 8 P vertebrae from the middle or end of a long, thin tail, which that may have been originally made up for more than 25 vertebrae. Now, based on the structure of the tail, researchers believe it belongs to a juvenile Coelurosaur, or part of a group of theropod dinosaurs that includes everything from Tyrannosaurus to modern birds. But it couldn't fly. The presence of articulate tail vertebrae in the sample enabled researchers to rule out the possibility that the feathers belong to a prehistoric bird. Modern birds and their closest Cretaceous ancestors feature a fused tail vertebrae called pygostyle that enables tail feathers to move as a single unit. So these feathers were a bit acting more like fur than actual feathers.
Well, look at ostriches. They can't fly either, right? So
yeah.
It's kind of the transition between being able to fly and not being able to fly.
So a pygostyle is the sort of thing you've seen if you've prepared turkey, says study co-author Ryan Mckellar, creator of Invertebrate Paleontology at Canada's Royal Saskatchewan Museum. The dinosaur feathers feature a poorly defined central shaft, which is called a rachis, and appears to keel to either side of the tail. The open, flexible structure of the feathers is more similar to modern ornamental feathers than to flight feathers, which have been well defined in central shafts, branches, sub-branches, and hooks, and all the stuff. In a report in June of this year of the same research team, Cretaceous-era bird wings preserved in amber reveal feathers remarkably similar to the flight feathers of modern birds. The current study concludes that the entire length of the dinosaur tail was covered in a type of feather seen in the sample. The dinosaur would have likely been incapable of flight. Rather, such feathers probably have served as a signaling function or played a role in temperature regulation. Fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Did they have any renderings of what this particular dinosaur might have looked like?
Oh, if you look it up, you probably could.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of these almost like an oviraptor dinosaur. Looks like a bit like those ostrich dinosaurs. Yeah. Walked on 2 legs and all that. The amber sample has been nicknamed Eva in honor of the paleobotanist Eva Colipris, the wife of co-author Philip Curie, who apparently found the amber. It's fascinating to see that in the little short amount of time that even I've been alive, our idea of dinosaurs and what they've looked like and how they function has drastically moved forward.
Well, you can blame Jurassic Park for a lot of that because they suspected even back in the early 1990s that they had feathers, especially the raptors that you see in there. But honestly, they look so much scarier in Jurassic Park. I mean, you put feathers on them, it just looks kind of silly, right? So that's probably part of it, is that they looked scarier without feathers.
But even if you take, for example, as a child, I've always been fascinated with dinosaurs. As a child, they used to give us these little figurines. Let's take T-Rex. Everybody knows T-Rex, right? The dinosaur stood completely straight up, and the tail would drag on the floor. He would be standing up pretty much like a person. And I think that's essentially politics. He was the king of dinosaurs, so he had to walk like a man, right? But now, 20 years after that, the dinosaur is like a T, right? It's like T turning on top of its legs. The tail acts as a counterweight to the front end. And now, even 10 years after that, now we're talking about T-Rex with a whole bunch of feathers on it. So it might look like a really huge, mean prehistoric chicken, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a scavenger as opposed to a
Well, they're still
predator.
debating that.
Yeah, that's kind of debated. So,
That's
but
still
what
debated.
the journal was called Current.
Yeah, it was called Current.
And normally when I read these sort of things from, well, more reliable sources than the National Geographic, it's usually like the Journal of Nature, the Journal of Science, the American Association of Paleontology. So
No, I
I'm
know
a little
that-
skeptical about that.
Oh, I know the National Geographic has kind of taken a
Absolute
bit of a downturn since
garbage.
Rupert Murdoch has
Yeah,
bought
he's
it.
destroyed it.
But, I mean, I don't see how this article would be made up. There's no reason. This is not a Jesus article either, right? It's not.
No, but it's definitely one of those headline clickbait type
So
of things,
we'll,
right?
we'll keep an eye on that, and if we misled you,
The
we'll
soft
let you know.
tissue thing is always misled by people because they think that there's actual DNA there, but there's not
Well,
actually.
Tyler, we can always depend on you to
Yeah,
get the original, to get the sources. So stay tuned.
I will double
We will
check it.
follow. Tyler will let us know,
I'll
and we
triple,
will follow
quadruple
the
check
story.
it.
Yeah. Well,
So you don't think it's going
leave
to be
my
on,
dinosaur story alone.
I hate Rupert Murdoch. He canceled Firefly. Hate him.
so do you think this dinosaur is going to be on display in the Creationist Museum anytime soon?
Well, no, they'll just say, oh look, there's soft tissue that proves it can't be 99 million years old. It's 6,000.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's also not a big sample. They said it's the size of a dried apricot, a couple of inches, so it's not a big sample. But nonetheless, it's an extraordinary find.
It is.
And it's given us a
Maybe.
more and more precise idea as to what these animals were like in the far, far past.
Sometimes size doesn't matter.
Isn't the other dinosaur?
Says Kevin's girlfriend.
Isn't the other dinosaur that they found? Isn't that one Susan? And this
The
one
T-Rex?
is Eva?
Sue the T-Rex?
Susan, yeah.
Yeah, Sue's the famous
There's a
T-Rex.
Triceratops
Susan.
as
So now
well.
we've got two girls.
Yeah, Eva,
and
Eva.
Susan.
Had a whole list of stuff.
Not that you can really tell what gender they are, but typically these things are like rapidly buried in like a mudslide or something, which is why soft tissue survives over that long. It's not actual DNA, so
Yeah.
you wouldn't be able to clone it or anything. But
I know a lot of Christians have a hard time with the fossil record, and a lot of them will say, well, how come we don't have so many more of these? Well, a fossil is actually a rare thing.
very rare,
It's a very rare thing. You need some really good conditions.
especially things that don't have an exoskeleton.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes.
obviously dinosaurs and us.
I mean, if you don't die in like a river delta where you're quickly buried or submerged or something like that, if you just die in the middle of the forest, your body's just decomposed
Yeah,
and
exactly.
eaten mushrooms and everything, and it's gone, right? So when you find a fossil, and we have lots of them.
And most of them are like mollusks and exoskeletons, things with outside shells and
Yeah, so
in
stuff like
wet, damp places.
seashells, and they're very, very tough.
Well, that's why there's not a lot of Homo sapiens, Homo erectus,
Yeah.
and that, because they're out in dry Africa, and I mean,
eaten by predators. And
it
bones
just
are-
goes bad. So that's what a lot of these creationists will be like, oh, DNA, not DNA, but soft tissue. They try to think it's DNA. Can't survive 65, 90 million. Really? How do we know that? I mean, we have these things that are buried in a avalanche mudslide, and then all of a sudden we find out, soft tissue can survive that long. Did we have a whole bunch of experiments prior to this that we buried things for 65 million years and there was no soft? No, it's just something we've recently learned. There
Yeah.
was no rule of thumb prior to this that soft tissue couldn't survive 60, 90 million years. How would you even conduct that experiment?
Yeah, and it would be relatively unlikely. But
yeah.
even if you take a look at some more recent archaeological discoveries, like these mummies from bog swamps and stuff like that, these people are in excellent condition, and they've been buried for a couple of thousand years. And it depends how rich the environment is, if it's rich in oxygen and stuff like that,
Yeah.
prone to help decomposition or not.
Well, and there would have been millions and millions of dinosaurs, so like 0.00001%, less than that,
Yeah, exactly.
actually survived this
Yeah, I
type
think-
of fossilization.
Yeah, these discoveries are just great. They really are. They just add to our knowledge, and it spurs the scientists on to find better ways of dating and better ways of figuring out.
It always appeals to the kid in you when it comes to dinosaurs because it's like dragons, but they're real.
They're real.
That's the thing about them, right? As soon as you see them, you can't help but be transported to a fantasy world.
Komodo dragons are real.
That's true. And we'll be right back with David Fitzgerald. We'll be right back after this.
Hi, I'm the Supreme Irreverend Dr. Randy Tyson from the Legion of Reason Diversion. Join me and my co-hosts, Christine Shelcha, Twila, and Nate Phelps, as we explore issues at the intersection of atheism, humanism, and skepticism. Topics range from alternative medicine to the interference of religion in public policy. We often have special guests to help us understand the topic du jour. Previous guests include biologist Jerry Coyne, ex-Muslim author Ali Rizvi, philosopher Peter Boghossian, and the late physicist Victor Stanger. You can watch us on the Legion of Reason YouTube channel or subscribe to the audio version through your favorite podcatchers such as iTunes or Stitcher. And don't forget to like the Legion of Reason Facebook page.
A Canadian, a New Yorker, and a Southern belle walked into a podcast, and all hell broke loose. Seriously though, what happens when we three ladies get together? Well, definitely a lot of talking. And accents. Funny accents. Well, I don't have an accent, but my co-hosts sure do. We mix North, South, and the Great White North together for 2 hours of pure secular discussion. Nothing is off limits. From goofy religions like Scientology, woo like ghost hunting and alternative medicine, to hardcore history, hermeneutics, sex, and science. We cover it all. What the heck is a hermeneutic? Well, it's not a guy named Herman who sings falsetto, that's for sure. Join Beth, Ashley, and myself, Deborah, every Monday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, and we take you beyond the trailer park and bring the conversation to life. Join us live on YouTube and participate in the conversation via the Q&A system, or catch us later on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, and Nobex. Visit www.beyondthetrailerpark.com for links to the show and our upcoming schedule. Bring your wine and sweet tea and settle in for fun facts and free thinking. We happily wear the explicit tag though, so make sure to wash out your mouth with something tasty before listening. That's live at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Come give us a like and a share, no matter what type of accent you have.
Whoever is led to believe that species are mutable will do good service in conscientiously expressing his conviction. For only thus can the load of prejudice by which this subject is overwhelmed be removed.
So what you know about natural selection? Go ahead and ask a question and see where the answer gets you.
And we're back. So we're going to get our friend David Fitzgerald on the line. Let's see if we can talk to David about St. Paul. Okay, well, joining us once again online is our friend David Fitzgerald, an author and probably one of my favorite amateur historian. David, how are you doing today, sir?
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for joining us here at Left of the Valley. I must say you're probably one of my favorite interviews of all time. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, you got a great personality.
Oh, yeah, we love to have you. Have a standing invitation to come anytime and talk about anything you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's brilliant. Thanks, guys.
So today we want to talk about St. Paul. St. Paul, to me, is that guy that everybody forgets about. You know, and they always talk about Jesus, they always talk about Matthew, Mark, and John and all that stuff. Nobody talks about St. Paul, and he had a huge influence on the Bible. David, what are your thoughts on St. Paul?
Well, you know, it's funny. The ironic thing about all those people you named, of all of them, he's probably the only one that's actually real, that it really existed.
I had no idea.
And, though I should say maybe he's only half real, because everything we know about Paul, half of that is bullshit made up by the guy who wrote Luke's Gospel, and the book of Acts. So the Paul that we love, that's kind of a super guy who does all these miracles, he never existed, but the kind of bitchy, queenie one from his letters,
was
that
he
guy
a tranny?
did exist.
He didn't seem to like women all that much, that's for sure.
He didn't. It wasn't big on the girls. Yeah.
No.
It's funny. He says things like, "Oh, it's bad for a man to waste times on frivolous things like making his wife happy when he can serve the Lord. Why can't all men be like me and completely immune to the temptations of women?"
Well, they say happy wife, happy life, right?
Yeah, he never says anything like that at all.
Some of the conservative Christians might object if you want to change it from St. Paul to Queen Paul. Do you think they might have just a slight...
I love that. Queen Paul, point for Nancy.
Was he suffering some sort of shortcomings we're unaware of?
Maybe.
Well, here's the thing. He does talk about this thorn in his side that God has given him to keep him humble. And there's lots of speculations on what that is.
My point,
and
exactly.
In my sex and violence talk, I suggest, and it turns out I'm not the first person to suggest this, that he was a closeted homosexual.
It could very well be. We'll never know.
Well, he was
certainly not some of the guesses they've had. Like, oh, it's an earache. Oh, no, it's epilepsy. It's like, no, we're not talking about an earache.
Penis.
He was an apocalyptic preacher, though, too, wasn't he? So he
thought Jesus was going to come down any minute now.
And it's funny. Yeah, that's kind of the idea for not having a wife, is the world's going to end anyways,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's just no time for that. And it's funny. He repeatedly tells us that Jesus is coming. He never says anything remotely like Jesus is coming back, or implying that this is a second coming.
This is way too many gay jokes. He's coming.
It's going to be a very serious show, obviously. David, in your humble opinion, I'm just going to take a little slant detour here. Why is it that Christians don't seem to recognize the idea that Jesus was supposed to come back like really, really soon after he was supposedly crucified and supposedly rose to the heavens and all that? He was supposed to come like really within a lifetime. How come Christians can't see that? How come they always think, oh, he'll be back in 2,000 years or so?
Well, it's funny. I mean, when they read the letters of Paul and when they read the book of Hebrews, they always read it through this gospel lens that wasn't around during their time. And when you read them kind of on their own, what they're actually saying, they're saying nothing like what we think of as Christianity. And there's all these huge holes in the story that just aren't part of his reality. For him, an apostle is someone who could argue that the reason Christ had appeared to him. He never says that any of what we think of as Jesus' friends and family have any kind of better criteria than he does. They're just one more person who claims that God appeared to him from heaven.
Well, I'd like to point out one of the most annoying things I find is when people try to attack Paul or support Paul, and they talk about stuff in Acts. I'm like, you have to differentiate between the two. There's actually this really good New Testament University course on YouTube from Yale University where he points out the contradictions between the book of Acts and with Paul, like really small things like Paul says he went there. Acts said he went there. Well, maybe we should believe Paul, that kind of thing, right? So
yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up because, on every point where there's an overlap between Paul and Acts is whitewashing. Acts is changing the story. Acts is not in agreement with Paul at all.
Well, yeah, like the whole Damascus thing and going blind, and that's just the book of Acts,
funny.
right?
That's the most famous, conversion story in history, and Paul never says anything remotely like that ever. Luke gives us 3 different versions of it, and Paul never mentions it once.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
Well, and the other thing I'd like to point out and maybe get your opinion on is the scholarly consensus regarding the letters that were misattributed to Paul, like 1st and 2nd Timothy and
Right. You've got the pastoral letters, which is 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, and you've got what's called the Deuteropaulines, which are Ephesians and 2nd Thessalonians. I'm forgetting the other ones. But they are those are more considered that they were written by followers of Paul.
Hold on a second. I just gotta. You're telling me that the conversion of Paul, the story where he's riding on his horse and he sees the blinding light and he falls off his horse, is actually not from his hand?
That is, he never tells us anything remotely like that, ever.
Holy shit balls.
Ever.
Holy crap.
In fact, he says everything he knows about Jesus comes from Revelation and Scripture, reading his Scriptures.
Holy jeez, that kind of, okay, because everybody always knows
what he tells us is that Jesus died and was according to scriptures. Jesus was raised on the third day according to scriptures, and Jesus rose again according to scriptures. That's his catchphrase for everything he knows about Jesus.
Which is like where Richard Carrier gets into the whole ascension of Isaiah and Philo and that kind of thing. But
absolutely,
one argument I don't like to see is when my fellow atheists, cite 1 Timothy as Paul being sexist. I think that's a bad argument.
Right.
He didn't write it, so...
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, he seems to have a much better relationship with the women who were the patrons of his churches.
Yeah, absolutely.
I kind of get this picture of one of those TV evangelists.
The power of Christ compels you!
Who have these rich matrons that support them. He seems to be much more like that kind of person.
Of course, they have money, right?
I'm guessing you're not a Bart Ehrman fan, but he did write a book. Yes,
honestly,
no?
I am a huge Bart Ehrman fan.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Just disagree on the historicity issue.
Yeah, absolutely. But his book Forged was really good and kind of helped me realize why certain things, weren't written by whom.
Forged, and he has another book called Forgery and Counterforgery.
I have not read that one.
Inconceivable!
Forged was very academically confusing, even though it was written for your average layman. It was still pretty in-depth compared to the other books that are, really good for your average person. Jesus Interrupted.
I love Forged, but Forgery and Counterforgery is just a brick of a book. It's like 700 some odd pages of dense text. Totally worth reading if you really get into that topic.
Or if you're a bit smarter than I, anyway.
That's not hard to do. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm glad you're learning something here, Kevin, because that's one that those are the arguments I see atheists using all the time, is they don't differentiate between Paul and Acts, and they don't understand about the letters from Paul that are in dispute and that sort of thing, and they're just bad arguments.
And the other thing you can say about anything that we know from Paul is even his letters that aren't in dispute, we know that even his genuine letters contain interpolations and changes, and that many of them were probably, if not all of them, were probably mock-ups of several letters and mashed together.
Well, so which of his letters would you call are in dispute?
I have them on my phone somewhere.
Indisputable or in dispute?
In dispute. Which one do you think are not really Paul's writings?
Well, it's not my opinion, but there's the Deuteropaulines and the pastoral letters, and so those are 6 out of the 13 letters, and
we don't have any idea who really wrote those.
Those are the ones that he did not write,
and we don't have any idea who wrote those.
The most famous author of all time.
What, St. Paul?
Anonymous.
Yes, exactly.
Well, it's like some sexist guy pretending to be Paul, so he can kind of interject his own belief system into it.
That's exactly right.
Well, how did we determine that? Was it because of the style of writing?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's because of that's the big thing is there's all these different criteria that they can examine, and it's not just for Paul; it's for any kind of writing to determine if something's a forgery or not. There's all these different tests they can use, like the syntax they use, the vocabulary they use.
But we don't look at mental illness as being a probability, a multi-personality disorder.
Well, I think there's lots of people who kind of tend towards those kind of explanations for Paul to explain things like, oh, well, this Damascus thing was clearly an epileptic seizure, and I can see why there's the tendency to equate some kind of mental illness with Paul, because hypographia, the hypergraphia of the constant urge to write is a symptom. There's all kinds of ways you can pathologize certain aspects of Paul's writings, but the part of the problem with that is some of those things aren't from Paul.
Yeah, it's the Book of Acts anyway, so who cares?
You can only go so far with some of these arguments. They're circumstantial. They're not. What's the word I'm looking for? You can't really prove anything from them. They're not demonstrable.
Is it possible that we have letters from Paul when he was kind of sober, and other letters of Paul when he was kind of horny or something? Or
it's interesting with the Book of Revelation. They actually did 100 different tests to compare it to the Gospel of John. And I've noticed it with my own writing. I write in a very specific way. I put commas in specific places, and I use "and" a lot, like that sort of thing. And that's the kind of thing they compared between the Book of Revelation and the Gospel of John, and they've determined with basically a 99% certainty that the person who wrote Revelation absolutely did not write the Gospel of John because of the writing style. And that's
because of the use of the Oxford comma?
Well, no, like a whole bunch of different things like that, right? So that's basically what they did with Paul as well, is that, I mean, some of the letters obviously can contradict the ones that aren't in dispute, and the style of writing is just completely different. You can actually tell.
Couldn't you just have a really bad writing day?
And sometimes they don't even agree on the same theology.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like, one is sexist, one's not.
Whether that's just him changing his mind over time, or that's a different person altogether. The other thing interesting about John and Revelation is it also is very clear that the author of the epistles of John are not the same as either of those guys who wrote the Gospel or of Revelation.
Now,
let me get back real super fast to the Paul's letters real fast.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Because you were asking which ones are in dispute. Those Deuteropaulines is 2 Thessalonians, Ephesians, and Colossians. Those are believed to have been written by later followers of Paul. And the other ones are the pastorals. Those are clearly from a different generation of Christians, and those are 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. So those are the 6. And again, even the 7 that aren't in dispute are clearly have been tampered with and edited too and redacted.
And the Christian we had on the show last week, as do many Christians, they don't like when I point out that, okay, sure, you can claim Paul wrote this in the year 50-something, but what's the oldest fragment or copy we have from Paul? And my current understanding is around the year 190, 200. I believe it's P48.
You could be right. I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know that we have no surviving Christian writings of any kind from the 1st century.
Yeah, we're talking 150 years.
Written originally in the 1st century, go back to the 2nd century at the very earliest.
150 years, and I mean, they didn't have the printing press, so one person had to copy the copy of the copy of the copy. Like, you're probably getting at least dozens of copies in between the year 50 and 200.
Is some of our earliest Christian writings, our very earliest Christian writings, aren't ones that made it into the gospel, or into the Bible itself. They're from gospels that we don't recognize.
Which ones, like Philip and stuff, or?
No, well, that one, but I'm actually specifically thinking of one called the Edgerton Gospel, which is the earliest New Testament papyrus fragment that we have. It used to be thought that P52,
that's what I thought too.
John was the oldest, and it turns out, nope, it's about 100 years older than they thought it was.
Oh, this is news to me. Can you expand on that? Because my understanding is P52 is where Jesus is talking to Pilate about, what is truth, and they've dated it to around 125 CE.
It's a little chunk of John 18, I believe, like 6 verses from that.
Yeah, it's like the size of a credit card.
And when I wrote Nailed, I was under the impression it was also the oldest Testament fragment, and I write that in Nailed that it is. And it turns out that 125 AD is actually the lowest end of about a 75-year window. So Christians were playing the game they always do, and it's like, oh, it's from 125 to 175? Oh, it must be 125. And then they repeat that ad nauseum until you hear them treating it as if 125, we know it's at least that young. It's like, no, you're way off.
It was Bart Ehrman that said it was between 100 and 150, and the reason you do that is because you can tell based on the style of the person who wrote it, their student is going to learn to be similar to their style of writing, so you give a 50-year gap.
Right. Actually, Vredar did a great post on this a year or so ago, and it turns out that the experts on the fragment itself, they've never claimed that it was as young as 125. That was something the theologians picked up on and ran with.
What's the date on the other one?
It could be as early as the beginning of the 3rd century. So,
What's the date on the other one, then? The Egmont, I can't pronounce what you said.
We're talking about New Testament fragments.
Yeah, I was wanting the date on the Edgerton fragment.
Off the top of my head, I don't know it, but I know it's early 2nd century.
Oh, okay. Do you know what it covers with the subject matter? Because I was looking at nothing supernatural.
If I remember correctly, it's some miracle that takes place on the banks of the Jordan, and some prophecy about grapes that none of it appears in any of our other Gospels.
Okay, I'll have to look that up.
That's why we did 72 virgins grapes of Islam. David, I think we need to talk quickly about establishing the lifespan of Paul, because I think a lot of people are confused as to when the man actually lived in relation to J.C., the carpenter.
Right.
Tecton.
Right.
So these guys, from my understanding, live approximately at the same time, right? Assuming that Jesus actually ever was a character.
Exactly, and that's kind of the default, or the caveat, is that a lot of times he's linked to Jesus was alive during this time, so if he says this happened then, it must have been this. And so there's all this kind of going out on the limb that is Jesus, and it's like, well, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. We're more certain about when he was writing and when he died, more or less, the time he died, if not the place and where.
We don't know roughly when he was born.
We don't. We know, I mean, very roughly. Very roughly. We don't really know how old he was, when he was doing his writing, and when he died, and we don't have anything about his early life. So it's tough to pin down exactly figures.
All we really have to introduce Paul is the so-called story in Acts about his conversion, and then from then on, it goes on.
Well, and this is the kind of thing that hinders any kind of being able to be certain about anything in the New Testament, really.
You have to kind of leave Acts out.
He's one of the better established guys. We know there was a guy named Paul. We don't know that about Matthew, Jesus, Judas, Paul, Joseph and Mary, all those guys. For the most part, they seem to be fictional characters. In fact, the ones you can really only say existed were the Jerusalem Pillars, the leader of the Jerusalem church, who was James, and Cephas, or Peter. And those may have been two different people, too. We're not 100% sure that they're not the same person, that they are the same person, rather. And James. So those people we can say were real people, but they're not quite the same people as we've seen in the Gospels. The Gospels took these names of people from Paul's letters and turned them into characters in the Gospels.
Okay. So were Paul's writings essentially older than the Gospel? If we go by Mark being AD 70 and plus.
Yes.
So yes, they were.
Yeah, Paul's 50.
Absolutely. All of his stuff was written around the 50s and maybe the early 60s, and he appears to have died around the mid 60s. The Christian tradition says that he was beheaded by Nero in Rome. But we know that can't be true because we have our earliest source is from the Bishop of Rome, who said that he died in Spain.
Houston, we have a problem.
And they have an account of him leaving Rome for Spain. If the Bishop of Rome doesn't know that Paul died in Rome, we can be pretty sure that he did not die in Rome.
It's a pretty safe
wherever
assumption.
He did die.
Yeah,
well, it's like that with Peter too, right? Isn't it not actually in the Bible that says he was crucified upside down? That's kind of like a Catholic tradition.
There is kind of a tacked on line at the end of is it the Gospel of John, I think?
The most ridiculous gospel out of all of them.
Oh, that's so true. But it's kind of a footnote at the end of one of the other New Testament books that mentions that Peter. It makes an allusion to Peter's death. We really don't have any accounts of his death that have any kind of historical validity. They're all stories that came later.
Okay. I came up with a decent argument, I think, anyways, regarding mythicism, and it's probably come up from many other people, I'm sure, because every time I come up with a good idea, I look it up, and 20 people came up with it 100 years ago. I
still feel your pain.
Oh, I hate that. But so Paul was a zealous Jew before his conversion, right?
Well,
yes, no,
yes. Though we don't know if he was really a member of the Sanhedrin, as he, But yes, but we can say he was a zealous Jew, sure.
Okay, so wouldn't he have been present during Passover? I mean, people came from all over the place. Wouldn't he have been there when Jesus was crucified, or no?
I'm sorry, say the whole thing again.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Wouldn't Paul have been present during the crucifixion? Like, wouldn't he have gone to Jerusalem to be there for Passover? I don't understand why he wasn't there.
That's not an unreasonable assumption, I would think.
Well, yeah.
There is a rumor that's been surfacing lately that people are starting to say that Paul could have been one of the Pharisees that condemned Jesus.
Yeah. They say a lot of things.
That sounds like Dan Brown kind of crap, doesn't
it? Maybe it is.
Exactly.
Well, he's responsible for helping kill Jesus, and then he just, fails to mention that.
Well, that was before his conversion. Right?
Well, no, but he talks about
conversion. Well, that makes his conversion all the more miraculous.
Exactly.
Well, he does talk about having, persecuted Christians. I believe it's in First Galatians. So you think he would have been like, oh, by the way, I kind of contributed to killing Jesus. So.
Well, I don't think if you if you're trying to...
He also mentions that he had family, or at least what he calls kinsmen, who were in Christ before him. So he may have actually had blood relatives who were Christians before he was.
Which is one of the arguments that people use against, Paul having just completely fabricated the whole thing. The Richard Carrier argument is still a little bit confusing to me. I don't understand exactly how he's saying the whole thing began, but this morning I was talking to a historian friend of mine who his argument is that Richard Carrier's position just doesn't work because why is Paul trying to put himself on equal footing with Peter and James when all of the Jesus information was from Revelation according to Richard Carrier. So if Jesus wasn't a real person, why is Paul arguing with James and Peter? Why are they a higher rank than him? And the obvious reason, according to my friend, is that they actually knew Jesus in the flesh.
Well, here's the thing, though. Paul, when he's arguing with these guys, he doesn't defend himself because he feels inferior to them because of their stance. He says, I don't even know who these guys think they are. I don't think they're even real Christians. They bring in false believers, And he's arguing with them completely, just all throughout his actual letter in Galatians. He never, even when there's that verse that says, I saw none except the brother of the Lord, James, the next couple verses after that, he's saying, yeah, these guys are nobodies. I don't even think they're real Christians. It's like, how do you say that about somebody you're trying to defend yourself on? There's never any sense of self-doubt about that. He compares himself to super apostles and says, well, they talk better than I do. They're not as, their voice sounds nicer. They're more polished than I am. He never says anything about, and they knew Jesus, but I knew Jesus because Jesus talked to me. He never says anything remotely like that at all.
It's almost like the no true Scotsman's fallacy right there from the beginning, right? They're not true Christians. I am.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah, and he says, oh, yeah, if somebody else tells you another gospel or another Jesus, even if it's an angel, don't believe them. Believe what we tell you.
Huh, that's interesting.
Do you subscribe 100% to basically the Richard Carrier model, or...?
Well, I want to be clear what we're talking about there, but yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what the origin would be, so that's where I'm confused. Obviously Paul didn't just invent it from scratch, so
right.
My idea,
not the first Christian by any stretch.
So
yeah,
my idea here was
you mention that because, and this is a good time to mention that I've written a follow-up book to Nailed to answer questions like that.
Oh, okay, because I understand the Christian version of things. All the miraculous crap is true and all that. And then the Bart Ehrman somewhat view regarding, he was crucified and his disciples were disappointed, so they just made up a bunch of stuff. Or I think he was talking about dreams and hallucinations.
And right. I think and it's interesting to me, even not just Bart, but even the historians out there who are kind of on the fence about whether Jesus existed or not, and the ones who are staunchly historicist, they all seem to agree that Christianity began not with a real Jesus, not with his death, but with people preaching that he had come back from the dead.
Well, and I think where I disagree with Bart is I think he believes that there was indeed a tomb. At least that's what I've been informed of, and I don't believe.
You ever know that from Paul?
Yeah, I don't believe there ever was a tomb. So,
right.
For some reason, Paul doesn't mention the tomb ever.
Right. And in fact, the way he describes, and Rick talks about this in The Empty Tomb, the book The Empty Tomb, the spiritual resurrection of Christ, if he believed that Jesus was on earth at all, like there's some ways that some things he say could be interpreted and think, well, that Jesus was this stealth Messiah who'd shown up, maybe 50 years before and no one knew about it, and because he didn't want the demons to know about it, this is all hush hush. So nobody was supposed to know about it until he actually was crucified and raised from the dead. It was all supposed to be a top secret operation, much like Ascension of Isaiah, exactly like Ascension of Isaiah.
And it was supposed
exactly like the book of Hebrews, actually, when you read Hebrews, and they're talking about a Jesus who does all this in heaven and not on earth.
That's another book that Paul never wrote, just by the way, Kevin.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's interesting. Jesus, super spy man, super secret agent.
Well,
yeah.
I think I watched Richard Carrier debating Zeba Crook. That's probably not how you pronounce his name, but he's an atheist scholar who was arguing for the historicity. So I kind of got the basic idea from Richard Carrier, and my understanding was that some people, whether it was James or Peter or whatever, they looked through these Jewish scriptures like Isaiah and that sort of thing, and even Philo, and kind of came up with this celestial Jesus where Jesus in outer space. I'd prefer to say the sky. Outer space just makes it sound ridiculous.
I was going to say, yes, they are talking about a Jesus in outer space, but I have the same reservation. They're talking about layers of heaven, and that he was in this layer of heaven, that layer of heaven. Yeah, when you say outer space, it automatically there's a woo-woo factor that comes
like
in.
Ancient aliens or some shit, right? So
exactly.
But basically,
that's why I cringe a little bit too. But essentially, that's exactly what they're saying. They're saying this all took place in the heavenly realm.
And it was to trick the devil into crucifying him in order to atone for humanity's sin. That actually, I mean, that's pretty stupid. But that makes a lot more sense than, I'd love to forgive these human beings, but first I'm going to have to become a human, get tortured, die, and then I can forgive them. Because it's not between himself and himself, it's between him and Satan, so that does make more sense to me.
Also, and you see the evolution of these ideas too. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Kevin. But you see with the ascension of Isaiah, with Philo, with the Book of Hebrews, you see them coming up with these notions and then kind of perfecting it, and then it morphing into what we know as Christianity.
I just think that from the layman's perspective, you see some of the symbolism. For example, Jesus, after he's supposedly resurrected, he's got this moment where he's ascending to heaven, floating up towards the sky. Right there, that image works very well if you actually think that there is a firmament and Jesus is going to go through the firmament and into heaven. But if you understand there is no such thing, there is no reason for Jesus to climb up towards the sky. Even if he lived outside of dimension of time, shouldn't he just disintegrate or disappear?
No, you're confused. He went to planet Kolob.
Oh, that's it, Kolob. What was I thinking? Of course, Kolob's up there.
And what's funny about that is that whole ascension basically boils down to one guy, the author of Luke. He's the only one that gives us that incident at all.
He's also the one who wrote Acts, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, great. So you get even less credibility.
My favorite thing to point out is when you read the story of Jesus being crucified in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus is totally pissed. He's like, God, why have you forsaken me? Like, why are you doing this to me? And then you read Luke, and Jesus is like, this is the plan. I'm going to go. I'm going to die. It's going to be all good. Like, this is the plan from the beginning. I'm like,
and by the time
you read the Gospel of John, he's like, yeah, bring it.
Bring some bigger nails. You guys are pussies. So, going back to St. Paul, David, we know he has a tendency to argue with Peter and James, but did he actually ever meet them? Do we know?
Absolutely.
It seems clear that he met them, but to him, they're just the leaders of the Jerusalem church. He never says, he never uses the word disciples full on stop in any context. For him, apostles aren't people who are friends and family of Jesus. They're people who, like him, had a vision or had a revelation or read the scriptures and went, aha, and could say that Jesus talked to them from heaven.
Okay. Oh, perfect.
Like Moroni with...
very like.
Yeah, and Gabriel with Islam. And
Moroni was the guy who made the submarine, right?
We all live in a yellow submarine, yellow submarine, yellow submarine.
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, yeah, of course.
and talk to Joseph
Just say
Smith,
one
too.
thing real fast. When I wrote Nailed was all about how the top 10 ways that the official Christian story just failed the reality test. But as soon as I wrote it, it became very clear that I didn't really talk about where I think that Christianity did come from. And that's why the new book, Jesus, Mything in Action, talks about. It talks about why more biblical historians aren't on board with the theory and how more than we think are on board with it. It talks about our sources for Jesus, because basically, if you're going to say that Jesus was anything, did anything, or said anything, you need to first ask, what's our sources for that? And so I examine those. And then the last part of the book is what I'm calling the Gospel according to H.G. Wells. And if we had a time machine and could see how Christianity evolved, this is what that book does. It takes us on a little time travel trip through the evolution of Christianity.
So for a guy who's never actually met Jesus, and Paul seems to have a very large influence on what got into the Bible.
Yeah, in fact, it's really weird when you think about, for the first 100 years or so, at least the first 60 years, he's the only Christian we hear about, even though we know there are all these other preachers preaching around, and we got all the Jerusalem church leaders. We have all these people who should have been, Jesus' disciples. They should have had something written that we would have held on to, but we don't have anything like that. We don't even have any mundane writings like church records or, any kind of traditions of what happened to the disciples after the story ends in the Gospels. We don't even have the Gospels, of course.
I get the impression that Paul was a bit of a nag. He's always like wagging his finger, and I bet you he got chased out of a lot of places.
He sounds like he really was kind of unlikable in a lot of ways, and he's constantly saying things like, "I swear I'm not lying. I am not lying to you."
No, of course not.
Which always
he's always
makes
getting
me
into
the
it with
biggest
other
skeptic.
Christians.
Yeah, but wait, there's more.
To tell you the truth,
Yeah. Buy my story now, and you'll get an autographed copy, of Jesus himself.
Well, and I think he did so well because he was inviting in the Gentiles too, right? So it wasn't keeping to this little group.
That was his claim to fame, is that he said, yeah, circumcision, nah, you don't have to do that.
Well, yeah, if somebody says, join my group, and you have to cut a piece of your dick off, and then somebody else says, no, you don't have to, I'm going to go with the guy that says I don't have to cut off a piece of it.
And that's exactly
I need all the length I can get.
Yeah, the least amount of restrictions possible, and I would go with that. So.
And then we revert back to my original comments on Paul.
Yeah, maybe Paul had an issue. That's bad.
Fire the moil. Fire the moil.
Has anybody here heard of the Thomas Jefferson Bible?
Oh, yes.
He just cuts Paul right out, eh? Just completely gets rid of him, yeah. He's not even in there at all. He just got rid of him altogether. Hated him.
Oh, that's funny.
I mean, he was a deist, but he still got rid of Paul altogether. I think he was kind of using...
How funny.
Yeah, I think he was kind of using the Bart Ehrman version of Jesus, if that's what you want to call it, from a deist perspective, but he hated Paul. And you know what? It's probably because he didn't know about the letters that are in dispute, the 6 letters that are in dispute. That's probably a big part of it.
Yeah, that's probably so.
Yeah, Jefferson probably didn't know at the time, right?
Well, 250 years ago, yeah.
Exactly. On top of that, right? Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, David. You've been a great guest as usual. The mic is all yours, my friend. If you need to plug anything, what are you up to? Let us know. I want to let our listeners know what David Fitzgerald's up to.
As we speak, the new book is at the Formatters, and I'm hoping it'll come out any minute now. If everything goes right, between my wife and I, we will have 6 books finished this year.
Wow.
So we're still working on the very last book. It's a science fiction trilogy. But as far as your readers are concerned, probably the one they're most interested in is going to be Jesus Mything in Action, which is a 3-part book. It was supposed to be 1 book until we realized it's 900 pages long. So now it's 3 books. They're all coming out very, very, very soon.
I highly recommend your previous book, Nailed. Is probably one of my favorite books because my brain is not powerful enough to tap something like Richard Carrier, but your book was just a great introduction for the layperson, and I really, really love it, and I highly, highly recommend it.
Just call it Richard Carrier, dumbed down for Kevin.
You know what? That's what I do best, honestly. I'm so glad to hear you say that.
Do you have any audiobooks?
I do. In fact, all my books that are out are also in audio. So the Mormons, Nailed, and Jesus Mything in Action will be out in audio.
Do you read them yourself?
Sorry?
Do you read them yourself?
I didn't read the Mormons, but yeah, I'm going forward. I'm going to be reading all of them.
Oh, okay.
Nailed, read, and Mything in Action. I'll read.
You're going to be doing that with David Smalley, I'm assuming.
Yes, almost certainly.
That's why I like Richard Dawkins' books, is because he narrates them himself. And then I read Bart Ehrman's books, and he doesn't narrate them himself, and it just irritates me every single time.
Yeah, that's a shame because he's got a great voice.
Absolutely.
But he's a busy guy. He probably doesn't have time to do it because it is a painstaking operation to read a book. My wife can do it in no time.
That's why Christians never read the Bible, eh? It's just such a pain in the ass to read the book.
David, are you going to be able to send us a link for your new book so we can put on the notes of the show?
I will do. Right now there is no notes to be had. There's no links to be had. Just if you can find me on Facebook, follow me on Facebook. That's probably your best bet to get any kind of updates.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, David. It's always a pleasure having you. Feel free to come back whenever you want. We just love you, man.
Thanks, guys. Right back at you.
Excellent.
Yeah, no, it was great having you. You warmed up a really cold day, so thanks for the great education and conversation, and looking forward to having you back anytime.
Now go play in the rain.
Thank you so much. Can't wait.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave.
Bye.
And that was our friend David Fitzgerald. Great interview. Tyler, you and him went at it. It was really good radio. Proud of you, buddy.
The great thing about David Fitzgerald is talking to him is like sitting around the table with a cup of coffee. He is so down to earth.
He's so
and
great.
So conversational. Just love the man. He's just great. Can't wait for the new book to come out.
Yeah. And if you guys were wondering, that music that we came back in with just before David came in, that was our old friend Bala Brinkman. Remember the rapper we interviewed? That was one of his songs.
Exactly.
A song that's it's called Evolution. That was a good rapper. We should almost bring him back. We had a great time with that guy. Okay, any final thoughts on Mr. Fitzgerald there before we conclude our show?
No, I just thought the conversation between he and Tyler was fascinating. I mean, getting down to the nitty-gritty of who Paul really was.
Yeah, exactly.
A great conversation.
Even I learned, so.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot of things today. Learned about St. Paul and learned about pigeons and boobs. And what a great show. What a great show we had. Thank you so much for being with us today, guys. You can follow us on leftatthevalley.com. You can send us an email at leftatvalley@outlook.com. Let us know what you think. If you want to send us some hate mail, send it to Nancy at
and send it by carrier, but send it by carrier pigeon.
By carrier pigeon with a bra. Coming up next week, we'll have our almost final show of the year. We'll have our Christmas special. We're just going to make it nice and light. We're just going to be talking about different Santas around the world and different little traditions, nice and light, what Christmas means to us. And just because you're an atheist doesn't mean you can't have a good time. You can't be a Grinch necessarily. And after that, we'll have our top 10 shows of the best of Left of the Valley for 2016. In the new year, on the 14th, we'll be talking to Jenny Rustemeyer and Grant Baldwin about food waste. These guys have made 2 movies about going green, and they're a really, really nice, sweet couple. I've shown one of their films before. We're going to have a blast with that, and we'll also have legendary anchor at CKNW down here in the Fraser Valley, John McComb. He'll be talking to us about depression. The man has suffered from depression himself. He's got some great insight about the subject, and he's even won a prize about his reporting on that. He was quite straightforward.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's going to be a great, great show. You can send us your suggestions, anything you want to talk about. We're more than open to listening to our audience about whatever subject they have. Anything else you guys want to talk about?
That sort of wraps it up.
All right. Guys, thank you so much. Until next time.
In my body, you can bet your last dollar I'll be working hard fighting this problem. Religion is a disease, it comes from culture, only true on a regional scale. Science is universal. Were you to say that Horus isn't real, but Jesus is, or Zeus, Thor, Mithra, Vishnu, you don't believe in them? I think the reason is apparent. You do what you're told and believe in the God assigned by your parents. I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it. I say it's ignorance and you just call it faith and unsubstantiated claims. That's something to be ashamed. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. Now let me take a sec, don't mean to sound so hateful, but I swear to God, pun intended, I find it disgraceful that thousands of children are raped by priests, and since they're holy men of God, they get away scot-free. And the Pope does his very best to keep it on the hush. Don't wanna affect business, he loves money too much. We know that they love the kids, but how the fuck can we protect them while they planning to molest them? We teaching them to respect them.
Fuck that.
The system is broke down, working backwards, and the only action or tactic I plan to practice now is to attack them. The parties of God's hands are bloodstained, millions of murders by believers, and they're all in God's name. And let me take a sec, don't mean to sound so hateful, but I swear to God, pun intended, I find it disgraceful that many atheists are told to be quiet. You're not alone, speak your mind, time to let it be known. I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it. I say it's ignorance and you just call it faith and unsubstantiated claims. That's something to be ashamed. I'm an atheist. I'm in